You know that saying that goes, they don't make them like they used to? Well, we're seeing that happen firsthand. And it's a scary time. It's a frightening time for anyone who is a long-term or a serious collector of memorabilia from their favorite franchise that just happens to be run by one of the biggest toy companies in the whole world, a mega corporation, Hasbro. This topic is something that has been on the minds of many collectors for a little while now, not just the last month where the Force Awakens product was released, not just the last several months where Jurassic World product was pretty horrendous. It's even something that people have been thinking about for the last 2 or 3 years, ever since Hasbro introduced the 5-point of articulation figures. Now let me be upfront about something. I have been one of the biggest supporters of the 5-point of articulation line of figures, not as a replacement for super articulation, but as a complement to super articulated figures. Back in early 2013, when Hasbro announced that they were going to be doing a 5-point of articulation line of figures, they said these are going to be for the kids, and for the adults that want to buy the super articulated figures still, we're going to keep making those. And in fact, they even introduced the 6-inch line of figures at that time, as something that the collectors, the adults were going to also want to purchase. It was at that point that Star Wars figures began to regress. Even though Hasbro promised that the Black Series line was going to be, more of the vintage collection type quality that we had been enjoying for several years right before that. The selection of figures that they had released for the Black Series line, and now we can look back over the last 2 years. The 3 3/4 inch Black Series was very mediocre. Lots of repacks, lots of rehashes, some new paint on some old figures, new head on some old figures, and a few new characters. There were a couple of good ones. I think that Darth Plagueis was a really good addition to the line, but that was probably the best thing that they did over the last 2 years for 3 3/4 inch Black Series. Super articulated Black Series figures, like this Captain Rex that came out earlier this year, isn't a bad figure, but it doesn't hold a candle to Captain Fordo, who came out a few years ago, and also came with additional accessories, a different helmet and a different bandolier. That way you could make him into a totally different figure, basically the same character with a different costume. They could have easily done that with Rex, thrown in a new helmet. He doesn't even have as nice a camo. This one has, very soft goods type, camo on him, which just makes him an overall nicer figure. But nevertheless, throughout that time, I've contended that Hasbro was smart to introduce the 5-point of articulation figures, because when Black Series first premiered in late 2013, the 3 3/4 inch line, basic figures that were super articulated were $10, which at the time was an all-time high. The 5-point of articulation figures, which they said were meant for kids, were $6, which, by comparison is a pretty decent price, especially when you consider the fact that not all 5-point of articulation figures are bad. From a sculpting standpoint, many of them actually look really good. They have very nice silhouettes, film-accurate sculpting, even more so than some of the super articulated figures. What I really like about the 5-point of articulation line, and I'll use this Leia here, I love this Leia figure as an example, is that it's very much a remake of the vintage Princess Leia. Just look at those legs. You got her legs underneath the dress. That's very much a feature of the old vintage figures. And, just the whole thing just looks very vintage. It even feels like a vintage figure. The plastic just feels like a vintage figure. And, as a companion to, a super articulated figure that costs $10, I don't mind that at all. In fact, I welcome it because I collected pretty much all the 5-point of articulation figures, more so than the super articulated figures. Let's fast forward to this year. Price increases on the super articulated figures went up to $13 a figure. Things like Captain Rex right here from the 2015 Black Series, $13 a figure. Meanwhile, 5-point of articulation figures like Leia right here stayed at $6. Or you could get a Mission Series 2-pack that came with 2 5-point of articulation figures for $10, a deal that is absolutely stellar. So when you look at that and then you look at a $13 Captain Rex, it's like, well, most parents or, gift givers are probably going to elect to get the 2-pack of figures, even if they're less articulated, because, $13 for one figure is pretty steep. And it is. And then when you consider that you can get a 6-inch figure for $20, it just really sweetens the deal of a $20 figure. So conspiracy number 1, Hasbro raised the prices on these guys to $13. That way people could say, oh, I'm going to jump on the 6-inch figure bandwagon. That's a better deal. Okay, so keep that in mind. So now The Force Awakens comes out. You get figures like Kylo Ren right here, which is a really nice figure. From a sculpting perspective, I think a lot of the Force Awakens figures look very nice. It's a 5-point of articulation figure though, so that's going to put a lot of people off automatically. But consider this is $8. That's a $2 jump from earlier this year when you could get a basic figure for $6. But these newer ones do come with useless pack-ins for an extra $2. And I hate the pack-ins, to be honest. I really don't like these pack-ins. Hasbro has done some really nice pack-ins in the past, like coins. They've done droid parts, where you'd buy a whole wave of figures and you'd assemble the droid. Stuff like that is just awesome. Even things they did like the display bases. That's something that you can actually use. These little parts that they're including with the Force Awakens figures are just useless. So Exhibit B. Hasbro recently announced that the super articulated 3 3/4 inch Black Series figures are becoming Walmart exclusives. So that means that within the next month or two, you're going to be able to get Kylo Ren here through Walmart for $13 with super articulation. I mean, is that worth it to you? Another $5 so you can get a super articulated Kylo Ren? A lot of people would say yes. In fact, I would even say yes for a few figures. But for a lot of people, $13 is just really cost prohibitive. If you think of, the gift givers, the parents, the aunts, the uncles who are going to buy their niece or nephew, an action figure, they're going to stick with the $8 Kylo Ren. It doesn't matter if it's super articulated, they're going to go with that because, it's more cost effective and it looks very good as is. So my conspiracy number 2 here, and when I say conspiracy, I mean, don't take it seriously. They're not conspiracies. These are just ideas that I have. Hasbro has given the super articulated line to Walmart as an exclusive. That way they can phase it out. The 3 3/4 inch Star Wars figure is probably the most collector-friendly, most sought-after line of figures that Hasbro does. So if you give those to one retailer to distribute, and we know that distribution has been absolutely abysmal for the last few years. I mean, this year has been pretty rough. But I mean, if you look at Jurassic World, if you look at the way that the Force Awakens product is right now, it's really abysmal. Very hard to track stuff down. And I think that the reason that they gave Walmart their flagship line of action figures as exclusives is because they want to phase it out. So I think that Walmart is probably going to have a very hard time with distribution on the super articulated Black Series line for 3 3/4 inch scale. They're going to continue selling them, but come next year sometime, Walmart's going to say, hey, we ended up not selling through on a lot of these. We couldn't get our stock replenished. Hasbro's going to take that as, people, weren't interested in super articulated figures anymore. Let's just not make them. My friends, I know this is a very scary prospect and one that I don't want to believe for myself, but I truly feel that this is what is happening. Hasbro is killing the super articulated 3 3/4 inch line. And I know I'm not happy about that. I know a lot of you guys are not happy about that. It's a travesty. Like I said, a 5-point of articulation as a complement to a higher articulated figure, is okay. But when you replace it with just, these minimally articulated figures, that's your only option. You're kind of forced to buy something that, you might not want, but you're going to buy it anyway because you did it on Midnight Madness for Force Friday. Even though Hasbro was offering you things like this, you bought it. I know there's a few people that didn't, but by and large, everywhere's sold out of these. Even a month later, you're really not going to find much Star Wars basic figures. And Hasbro is taking that to mean, we did something right. We sold 5-point of articulation figures and people bought them. They like them. We're going to keep making them and we're going to keep making money. And like I said, it's not just Star Wars. Even with their Marvel lines, Hasbro was doing, super articulated Marvel figures for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, for the movies like Captain America, Iron Man, Thor. And if you look at it now, they haven't been making those super articulated figures. I think the last movie that had them was Captain America, the Winter Soldier. The Avengers 2 didn't even get a super articulated line of figures. Guardians of the Galaxy, one of the biggest movies of 2014, didn't even get a single 3 3/4 inch scale figure. All they did was 6-inch Marvel Legends and 2-inch figures. Who wants a 2-inch figure? Now for the Marvel films, all they're doing is, 5-point of articulation, 3 3/4 inch figures. If you want to get a highly articulated Marvel Cinematic Universe figure, you have to go with the 6-inch guys. And even then, they're not making a whole lot of them. Even for the Avengers, Age of Ultron, they only made a few figures from the movie. And I've heard a lot of people say, oh, it's Disney. It's Disney's fault that all this is happening. It's not Disney's fault. It's Hasbro's fault for, designing the product. And maybe to an extent it is Disney's fault, Lucasfilm's fault for approving the stuff. But nonetheless, there's no arguing that all Hasbro's lines as a whole are going downhill. And like I said, it's not just Star Wars, and it's not even just Marvel. I mean, it's largely also, as you know, it's the Jurassic World line. 20 years after the original film, which had absolutely amazing toys, I really expected that we were going to get some really awesome stuff for Jurassic World from Hasbro. But this is what we got, you guys. We got stuff like, this Velociraptor Delta, which is just... Yeah, she basically feels the way that I feel about Hasbro with this situation right now. It just sucks. And just to give you an idea here, look at this. This is a Hasbro Velociraptor from 2009, which is a repaint of a figure from 2001. Look at the level of detail between this and that. This is 2001, this is 2015. The insanity. Now, one area that Hasbro really excels in is their 6-inch figures, and there's absolutely no denying that. From their Marvel Legends to their Star Wars 6-inch Black Series, I've been very, very pleased with Hasbro's 6-inch efforts over the last couple of years. Really pleased with the way that Black Series has been, churning out awesomely detailed, high articulation 6-inch figures. And, credit where it's due. Hasbro does very, very good with their 6-inch figures. But it's not just about 6-inch figures, you guys. 3 3/4 inch has been a staple of the Star Wars line since 1978. And think about this, you guys. If you're a mom and pop restaurant, you're going to want to provide your guests with the most well-rounded experience that you can give them. You're going to want to give them a really good meal. You're going to want to give them very good service. And you're going to want to charge them at a reasonable price. Now, if you're that chain that's been around for 30 years, you're huge, you've expanded, your stuff's going to become more generic. You're going to be less inclined to provide your customer with an exceptional product. That's where Hasbro is today. They've gotten so big as a mega corporation, raking in billions of dollars a year, that they can basically give you whatever they want and you're probably going to buy it. And even if you don't, they don't really care because somebody else is going to buy it. The whole vote with your dollars thing is something that's quite smart in terms of, showing your support for something, doesn't really apply. Look at 3 3/4 inch The Force Awakens figures. They're gone. It doesn't matter if you liked them or not. Other people did, or other people scalped them. And it's that very mentality that is very scary, because it basically goes from giving you figures that look like this to figures that look like that. It's going from figures that look like this to figures that look like that. My friends, there is no contest, and what I am telling you I feel to be absolutely true, and that is that Hasbro is killing super articulated figures. And it's not just that. Their quality as a whole has been deteriorating for the last couple of years. And that's no secret. If you collect any of these lines I've been telling you about, you know for a fact that this is all true. And I am very fearful, but also quite confident that, come 1 or 2 years, the Walmart exclusive Black Series line, which isn't off to a good start given some of the choices that they've made by repacking 10-year-old, Darth Vader figures that don't have a whole lot of articulation, can't even hold their lightsaber, is going to become something of a limited run line. You're going to be able to get your Force Awakens figures in the next month or two, and, maybe another few waves out of the Black Series 3 3/4 inch Walmart figures. But, after a few waves, distribution's going to dry up. People aren't going to be able to find what they want. And Hasbro's going to say, it doesn't matter because we made a 3 3/4 inch Kylo Ren with 5 points of articulation, and people bought them up like hotcakes. Alright my friends, if you enjoyed this video, I encourage you to please like and subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, what you think about all this. Be sure to check me out on Twitter, and as always, I want to thank you for watching Victoria's Cantina. Until next time, bye-bye.